All right, back again for more digestive system. So the last thing we were doing was dealing with this group of mammals called the ruminants with this digastric stomach that's divided into multiple chambers, in this case 4, composed of 2 divisions. So we had division 1 was the rumen plus the reticulum, and division 2 was the omasum and the abomasum. Okay? All right, so the cow is going to bring in grass. The grass moves down through the esophagus and hits this large chamber here called the rumen. The rumen is full of lots of bacteria that are capable of digesting plant material. So you're looking at bacteria that have enzymes like cellulase, hemicellulase, and the rumen basically churns all this mass of bacteria and enzymes and plant material to try to get it to the point where it's a little kind of softened up and moved out. Then what's going to happen is the cow is going to bring material back up, regurgitate it out of the rumen, up through the esophagus and back into the mouth. And in the mouth, we're going to get this remastication. So mastication is just a fancy word for chewing on things. The remastification is the re-chewing of all this plant material. This plant material brought up from the rumen and that's remasticated is referred to as cud. Sometimes you'll hear people talking about cows chewing on their cud. And I think that's where this kind of ruminating idea came from. When we talk about people ruminating on an idea, is that these cows are ruminating on this cud. The idea is they get a second crack at mechanical digestion. We've done some chemical digestion using those bacteria in the rumen. Now we've moved up for a second round of mechanical digestion, then bring it back down to the rumen for even more chemical digestion. This is a pattern we're going to see with organisms or animals that eat plants, is that plant material is very, very difficult to digest. So you need some tricks that you can use to try to deal with all of this very, very hard to digest material. Okay? All right, once the cow feels like things have gone along pretty well in the rumen, then we're going to move things over into the second division of the stomach, the omasum and the abomasum. Think like our stomach in that sense, where that portion of the stomach does a lot of what our stomach does. And I'm about to talk about our stomach here in a second. The first division is working on that plant material. The second division is doing what we traditionally think of as stomachs and their basic functions. Okay? All right. So let's go now to organisms like us with a monogastric stomach. And in the vertebrates overall, plus some of the inverts, right, in the vertebrates and some of the invertebrates, digestion, there's some digestion that occurs in the stomach. Okay, so if we look at my handy dandy chart here, it's got the digestive system broken into pieces. There's the oral cavity, the pharynx, and the esophagus, followed by the stomach and the small intestine parts. But we talked a little bit about carbohydrate digestion starting in the mouth, right? The cleaving of these alpha-1,4 linkages and these large polysaccharide molecules into maltose molecules. So that's covered up here. But the stomach's main job here is to begin this process of protein digestion. Okay, begin this job of protein digestion. So to accomplish this, the stomach manufactures a molecule called pepsinogen. Pepsinogen, if we break it down, is basically pepsin generating, right? A molecule that's going to generate pepsin. This pepsinogen is manufactured by a specific group of cells in the stomach called chief cells. Okay? So in my diagram here, there's the inner surface of the stomach. There are lots of folds, and in these folds there are even more folds. This basic epithelium, right, the epithelial layer here, and we know from other situations in biology that when you make something that has lots of surface area like this, the surface area must be important for some reason. And in this case, we have lots of these cells here. The pink ones are the chief cells. Lots of these cells producing this pepsinogen. The more surface area for these chief cells, the more pepsinogen can be manufactured and dumped into the lumen of the stomach. Okay? So the pepsinogen is being manufactured by these chief cells. There's another group of cells here called the parietal cells. And the parietal cells are going to be manufacturing hydrochloric acid. All right? Okay? Now, when you take pepsinogen and expose it to this hydrochloric acid, that causes the pepsinogen to become pepsin. So here, pepsinogen and hydrochloric acid, boom, becomes pepsin. Pepsin is an important enzyme because what it does is it begins to cleave polypeptides or proteins into much, much smaller chunks. So if I had my protein here, right, there's the amine group at one end of the polypeptide chain, there's my carboxyl group at the other end. What the pepsin does is just begin to cut, right, this overall polypeptide into much smaller fragments of polypeptides. So when we say that protein digestion begins here, that's exactly what we mean. It's not finished here. We're just starting to take apart these proteins. Unlike the other biological molecules, the shapes of proteins are very elaborate, right? That's why we have that whole language of primary, secondary, tertiary, quaternary structure. Very elaborate three-dimensional shapes. And what we need to do is begin to start to open those shapes up, right? So if I've cut here, I now have a shape that's open. There's another open shape there. There's another one there. And now I have all these pieces that in subsequent digestions, I can break those down into individual amino acids. This stomach protein digestion is a very crude digestion. We're just cleaving the protein into large chunks. That will make it easier to hydrolyze the polypeptide later. Okay? Now, there is some danger to producing hydrochloric acid within an organism. This hydrochloric acid is nasty for a lot of reasons, one of which is it produces hydrogen ions, which means it alters pH. So the pH of the stomach, because of this hydrochloric acid, is around 2. That's a very, very low pH value. That pH is enough to kill a lot of cells. Okay? It's certainly enough to do some pretty severe denaturing of proteins in the stomach, and the denaturing is probably to facilitate the activity of this pepsin, right? Open the protein up a little bit, allow it to be cleaved. Okay? All right, so we do have to protect the stomach from all of this hydrogen ions that are produced by the hydrochloric acid, this protection is being done by a group of cells here in red. So we have the chief cells, the parietal cells, and we have this other group of cells here called the mucus cells. And these mucus cells are producing mucus. The idea is we produce this mucus, and the mucus should help line the stomach, and that mucus should protect those cells in the stomach lining from all of this nasty hydrochloric acid. Okay? All right. People talk about things like ulcers. One of the causes of ulcers, there are lots of different ones, but one can be damage to these mucus cells. You're not getting the mucus production that you should be, or the mucus cells get a little aggravated. They don't produce the mucus that's necessary, or they're not producing enough mucus, and we have portions of the stomach exposed to this hydrochloric acid, and the hydrochloric acid eats away at it. We also have the possibility of the hydrochloric acid leaving the stomach, right? In that case, if someone has a cardiac sphincter, again, I hate to call it a sphincter, but doesn't close off real well, that means when the stomach is churning on things, stuff can be pushed up into the esophagus, and the esophagus doesn't make that mucus, so we could have damage occurring to the esophagus, esophageal erosion from all this hydrochloric acid. Okay? All right, so in the stomach here, notice all of those folds. Notice all of these folds for increased surface area for secretion of materials, pepsinogen, hydrochloric acid, and mucus. These folds within the stomach here are called rugae. And the idea is, even though the stomach appears to be a very, very small organ relative to everything else, if we looked at the surface of it, it would have all of these folds here, the rugae, and within those would be all of these kinds of folds here, where all of these cell types hang out. Okay? Now, that means if I could stretch all of this stuff out, a typical stomach can hold, stretched out, about 2 liters. And the overall surface area in the stomach is about 800 centimeters squared. So the surface area of the stomach is actually quite large. Okay? All right, now, once the bolus hits the stomach and it mixes with all of this acid, we're going to refer to this material as acid chyme or chyme. Okay? Acid chyme or chyme. So the bolus is now chyme when it's in the stomach. Okay? Now, at the end of the stomach, there's that pyloric sphincter. The stomach is going to begin to release small amounts of material into the small intestine. It's not going to release it all at once and cause this log jam in the small intestine. It releases it a little bit at a time so that the digestive enzymes can work at things a little bit at a time to increase the efficiency of digestion. Okay? All right. Most of the enzymatic hydrolysis occurs in this next organ here called the small intestine. Okay. Most enzymatic hydrolysis occurs in the small intestine. Okay? Now we're going to divide the small intestine into 3 parts. This is based a little bit on cross-sectional anatomy of the small intestine, which means there's probably functional differences, right? Form and function go together, and there are functional differences to these 3 different sections of the small intestine. All right. The first 25 centimeters of the small intestine is called the duodenum. And then what's happening in this first 25 centimeters is that the acid chyme is mixing with the digestive juices, specifically all of these enzymes. So all of these hydrolytic enzymes are in this duodenum. Now they get into the duodenum because they're produced by accessory organs to the digestive system. So actually, sorry, forgot to take a look at these real quick. I know it's in here somewhere. As I whip through these. Thought I had an overall, there it is. Okay, I did pass it and just didn't see it. All right, so here's the small intestine. So coming off of the stomach, we would be into this first part of the small intestine, which is the duodenum. I like this diagram because everything's not all folded up together. And notice there are 3 separate organs here that are connected to the small intestine via a duct. The first of these, the liver. The next one is the gallbladder. And then the final one is the pancreas. So I would refer to these as accessory to the digestive system. They have other functions besides digestive system functions, at least the liver and the pancreas do, but they do have a role here in digestion. So let's start out here with the pancreas. Okay? The pancreas produces lots and lots of digestive enzymes. So let's go back to this image here. Here we are in the lumen of the small intestine, right here, and we're listing off particular enzymes that are involved in enzymatic hydrolysis. So here's pancreatic trypsin and chymotrypsin.